everyone. I'm Shelley Lyle.
And I'm Jessica Francis.
And welcome to Voices from the Field, a podcast brought to you by the Department of Sport Management at the University of Florida. This podcast was created to share the career journeys of sport industry professionals. Our hope is that you learn the ins and outs of different sport industry professions. We are excited to be with all of you this week and with our special guest, Sarah Lowdon, Portland Thorns assistant coach.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi. Sarah received her bachelor's and master's degrees from McNeese State University, where she played on the women's soccer team. She also has a master's in sport management from the University of Florida. Go Gators. Fun fact, Sarah has 17 certificates and licenses, including her U.S. Soccer Federation professional license and A license. Sarah's coaching experience includes McNeese State, Wayland Baptist University, the Houston Dash, and South Texas Youth Soccer. She coached and taught at Sam Houston University and the University of Florida before she was a volunteer assistant coach at Penn State University. Sarah's most recently worked for the NWSL's Houston Dash as an assistant and interim head coach before taking her current assistant coaching position with the Portland Thorns. We're so excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Excited to be here.
Yes, Sarah. So let's get started. Can you share a little bit about your career journey as far as, starting with college and when did you really know you wanted to work in coaching?
Well, just with Jessica reading all that out, I now feel really old. But it's a good question. I knew I always wanted to coach from a very young age. I'm from Newcastle, England. Have a bit of an American twang, I think, but been in the US now over 15, 16 years nearly. So I always knew I wanted to coach from like a city that it basically is reared around the game of soccer, reared around the game of football. And so I used to play this video game, and I think I've said this a lot throughout my career, called Championship Manager. And it was a management game. So not like FIFA where you actually play the game. It's like you're actually managing the players and picking a lineup. So I did that from the age of 15. I used to spend 8 hours a day on it. So I always knew I would go into some sort of management. And so, I was just reared up around it. And then I came to the US at 18, was on a soccer scholarship at Mississippi State University. You can imagine going from England to Mississippi. And then from Mississippi to Louisiana, and then Louisiana to Texas. So I definitely got the South, and then obviously to Florida. Got the experience of the South. And from there, finished playing, got a master's degree, was a volunteer coach. As you can imagine, being a volunteer coach is very difficult when it's the same teammates that you played soccer with. So I knew I had to leave and branch out, and I went to a small school in West Texas called Wayland Baptist, which Jessica mentioned. And it was a place called Plainview, Texas, and it lived up to its name. It was very plain. Once there. And that was really my first coaching start. And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing, to be honest. I was 24 years old, making $25,000, and I thought I was a millionaire because I just got out of college. And that's how it all started, really. And then from there, just kind of progressed through the ranks of college and then landed in the professional realm. So.
Very cool. And because I know you a little bit, I would love to just hear, you've taken some really unique avenues to get to where you are today, as far as being assistant coaches and then kind of pivoting into graduate or coming back to university and working with different coaches at different levels in different positions to kind of gain the knowledge. And even watching you working alongside you. And so for you, when you were taking your path, did you know the next step you were taking? What kind of made you choose those unique positions?
That's a great question. So I feel like there's the conventional route that people go through where they go from, kind of volunteer coach, assistant coach, associate head coach, then head coach. And I knew for me, I didn't play at the University of Florida like Shelley Lyle. So I knew that I had to kind of stand out in different ways. And so when I had finished with Wayland Baptist University, I actually volunteered for a professional team, which was the Houston Dash, which I later went on to manage 4 or 5 years later. Which was obviously last year. But the biggest thing was I wanted to be as prepared as possible, because coaching is such a, women don't last in coaching generally, speaking, and they get in and they get out. And so it's how can you be as prepared as possible rather than just climbing the ladder as fast as possible? So I was a volunteer coach for a professional team, had no business being there, picked up cones. I used to drive 5 hours round trip, which seems like a different life now. And I still have the same car. It has like over 206,000 miles on it.
Still alive. I love it.
Still there. It's still going. But yeah, so it was just trying to like basically learn from. It was basically I created my own internship for 3 national championship coaches. I worked with Becky Burley. Obviously, Shelley knows. Shelley played for Becky and worked for Becky. She's probably been the biggest impact on my career, which we can talk about later. And then Randy Waldrum, who coached at Notre Dame, now coaches Nigeria and at Pitt. And then Erica Danbach at Penn State. So I tried to really like find people where my values aligned, and I went in with any position that I could get. So with Randy, it was a volunteer coach. With Erica, it was a volunteer coach. And with Becky, it was an equipment manager. So any position to get my foot in the door to learn from, honestly, like these basically coaches that knew what it's like to win and have career longevity.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah. And I think like, I love, your patience, your work ethic is unbelievable. And I think that's what it takes in the coaching world and other sports too, right? Like not everyone plays the sport, but also so not everyone has access to the resources or the network to get them in the door for those even graduate positions. I'm thinking about like football and stuff like that. So I think it's very cool and helpful for our students to know, like you can find a way, but it's not going to necessarily look like the conventional way, but that doesn't mean it's actually the best one, because your career trajectory was super fast. Once you got going, it was like you're at the pros already. You know what I mean? And you're interim head coach, and how many years in the pro league? So yeah, huge moves there. So anyways, we'll talk more about that. But let's move into what are your daily duties and roles? What are some things you think students probably don't know about what an assistant coach does at a pro level?
That's a good question. Well, our league is continually expanding and growing. And so from the early days, like 2014 and 15, when I was there, the players didn't even have a change in facility, which is crazy to think about. The head coach didn't have an office. Obviously, it was an expansion team with the Dash at the time. They entered the league, and I think they entered the league in 13 or 14. I can't remember. And so like it was just a new franchise. But now we have access to, I mean, we're actually getting our own training facility built next year, but Kansas City already has their own training facility. Other teams obviously are having to match that. So I would say the resources there's been more money piled into it. So in terms of my role, like there's still some things that I'd have to do that potentially may not think in the pro world. So I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, like, you know, like we do deal with just trying to think, we do all chipping with bags, like carry equipment on the road. And we have players that have won World Cups and Olympics that are the first to go carry the bags. Like that's just the culture of our league. Like it is what it is. Everybody chips in and helps. But yeah, I would say other duties that they might not expect. So it's a lot of basically coding with a platform called Sports Code, which Shelley, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sports Code because you probably paid for the licenses when we had it at Florida. But yeah, it's a lot of like basically coding games and watching a lot of film and basically packaging that together for players and presenting basically. But it's a lot of long hours on computers. Honestly, like we do obviously do a lot of coaching in the pro world compared to the college realm, because college realm, I feel like you're dealing with a lot more academics. You're dealing with kind of life out of sport. And I feel like in the pro world, it's very like you are focused on more of the X's and O's. But the reality is like the professional business is all about managing people. And so spend a lot of time talking to players, having hard conversations, which is leadership 101, really.
Yeah. Awesome. And before I pass it over to Jessica, what activities in your job have you really enjoyed? I would even say, like, what are the ones that make you come alive? And then what have you found pretty challenging?
Great question. I think the challenges is how you can, especially over the course of a season when you're playing so many games, like we're competing in the CONCACAF Champions League, our regular season, and we're also competing in the Summer Cup that we played last night. And so we have 3 different tournaments. And I say the challenge is like trying to make things fresh, because you play a lot of games. Sometimes you don't get to train a lot. So it's like when you're presenting the scout or presenting set pieces, it's like, how do you make it as engaging as possible? Because it can just get in this routine of it's cycle after cycle. And I would say the things that make me come alive, I think just getting to work with the players daily, and like the level of player that I get to work with is like at my age, I feel like is, I don't know, it's an honor, it's a privilege to be around those types of players. But I think in general, just being able to help in whatever way that is, even if it's just a listening ear, I would say that's what makes us come alive.
That's amazing. You mentioned something that I actually want to ask that's completely off script, but I'm always harping on getting more women to work in sport. And you mentioned that not a lot of women have long careers in sport. And so can you speak a little bit more to that? Why do you think that is? How can we improve that? Any thoughts?
It's a great question. I think there's a number of factors. I think sometimes like our field is difficult, especially for women that want to have families. I think it's difficult there's not a lot of women in leadership positions. And the reality is like sometimes the people that get hired are people that are like people that are in leadership positions, if that makes sense. And so we need more female athletic directors. We need more female head coaches. We need more female general managers. But I think what's really important is like if we're going to put people in positions and they may not have the experience, we have to surround them with people that are stronger in areas that maybe those people that are in those leadership positions are not. So for example, when I was at Houston and I got put into the acting head coach role, I'd never been a head coach before. And I just got thrusted into it. And I told the club president, I'm like, I need to hire 2 people. Like the first person is somebody that needs to help me with like the defensive side of the game tactically, which was Alan Kirkup Shelley.
Oh, nice.
The second person I want is an external consultant, which was Becky. And so you want to surround yourself with people that like these combined. Alan and Becky have 35 years experience, maybe more, like 60 years experience, maybe. I don't have any experience. So I think that's the first thing is putting people in their strength zones and making sure that if people don't have experience and we're putting them in those positions that we set them up for success. So I would say those are some of the factors probably.
I love that. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like you said, there's stigmas and I think the whole idea of women being in charge of raising the family and things like that, it can pull people away from their careers or whatever. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, that it is possible to do both or just follow your dreams, which you're clearly pioneering in that area. So I think that's awesome. And with that, how would you say you've evolved as a leader? I mean, you talked about getting thrown into your head coach position. So from when you got your start to where you are now, how would you say you've evolved?
Oh, I feel like I evolve every month, honestly, because you're always learning, especially like in the environment, because the more mistakes you make, you learn from mistakes. Like that's the reality of it. I would say in the 2 times that I had the interim position and the acting head coach position, like I knew for a fact that I was going to have to manage the players. Like that just comes with the territory of being a head coach. But like I had no idea that I was going to have to manage the staff. And it's actually harder. Like 10 times harder. And now I feel sorry for Becky for everything that I put her through over the 4 years that I was at Florida, because I'm like, I was high maintenance. But yeah, I think just like going through those experiences of like, like realizing that managing people is hard. And to be honest with you, like in leadership positions, it's the most important job. Mm-hmm. And I never really really experienced that until I sat in the seat. Like I thought I knew what it was like to be a head coach because I had sat in the head coach's office for 4 years, but like I had no idea. And I think that's like my biggest lesson is like, you just have to go through these experiences to kind of really like understand. For example, mood contagion. Like if I showed up in the head coaching position or a leadership position and I'm in a bad mood, like that just transcends through everybody. And I experienced that. And so you can get away with it a little bit more when you're an assistant, but you cannot get away with it when you're being watched and you're in that seat. So I would say just going through the experiences like that. And I think those experiences have set me up at Portland, just in terms of coming in and being able to have an impact in a different way, not being loud or anything like that, but just being able to come in and gain credibility. Because honestly, like in our league, with the caliber of players that we have, some of the best players in the world, I don't have the experiences that they have. So it's like trying to build credibility and being able to help them in any way. So yeah, I would say just leadership wise, it's being able, like being in the environment every day, and you learn from conversations, you learn from making mistakes.
I love that. And even being open to learning from mistakes. I think sometimes we can think mistakes are so fatal, and it's like, no, you just kind of learn from it and keep it pushing. So I love that. And with that, what's one thing you wish you had known when you first started out your career?
One thing I wish I'd have known. I would say I feel like I tried to plan everything out. And I mean, I would never have, if you had given me a crystal ball and I looked at it and you tell me that would be the Portland Thorns as an assistant in 2024, I would have probably laughed. But I would just say, like, you just have to trust your process and not worry about what's next. And I think as young leaders or I can't even speak, young coaches, I think sometimes you get so caught up in like what's next. And the reality is you just have to focus on the process and what you're doing in the now. And that's the most important thing.
That's great.
That's awesome. Yeah. And what are some of the best resources that have helped you along the way outside of people? Because we'll get to that in a minute, but.
I would say those 17 licenses have come in handy. No, I think just like, I know obviously people are important for sure. Like that's the number one thing. But I think the courses that I have been on or the degrees or whatever you want to call it, like I know it's a lot, but I think the network that I've been able to build from like networking should be a way of life. It shouldn't just be because you need something. And I think that's like the mistake that people make is like they reach out when they need something rather than just continually checking in with colleagues weekly. And so I would say that's been like my most, I guess, beneficial thing from these courses and licenses that I've done. It's not really about the content of the course. Of course, that's important, but it's the people that I've met along the way. Because at the end of the day, like you need like people to help you get the job for sure. But the reality is you need people to help you keep the job. And I think that's like the most important thing is like, it's okay when you submit your resume and decision makers make decisions based on your titles and what's on the piece of paper, but you need to maintain the job to maintain your career and continue to progress. So I think that's what I would say is just the networking that I've been able to have throughout that course.
Yeah. And it makes sense too, when you're thinking about like, even I'm going back to your comment about hiring 2 people when you took that head coaching position. It's like, I know I need help. Like, I love the humbleness you've always had like in it. And also like not being afraid, even though you want to be perfect, like to make mistakes and to know, like, you need to call people in to support you along the way. I haven't really heard many people and, head coaching role, who are willing to go like, my first step is hire help. I think that's really very cool and speaks highly also one of your networking, the need for that, and then your willingness to ask for that.
I think you have to know your blind spots too. And I think I'm well aware, like I have a lot of blind spots and like self-awareness is super important as a leader for sure.
Absolutely. So let's get to the people. Who are 3 people, I should say, not ordered or ranked, who have been really influential for you in your career, and how have they made an impact?
I would say obviously number 1, and I know you said don't rank, but I'm just gonna like the number 1 person in my career for sure is Becky, working with Becky at the University of Florida. I mean, like just like a generational human, like she's not somebody I like necessarily like keep in touch with every day now, but we do definitely speak every week. And I think just like I'm a better person when I speak to her. Especially when I'm not in a good place. But no, like just the lessons that I learned from her in my 4 years, like, just little things like define, manage, model, like just little snippets that I've learned in my career, like as a leader, and that I've able to take into my environment. So like, like one of the things that we talked about when I took the Houston job was like defining the behaviors that you want to see in your environment, and then you have to manage those behaviors, good and bad, and then you have to model those behaviors as a leader and the staff. So, or whether it's Q-tip and she's telling me to quit taking things personally and launching a Q-tip at me from across the room. So I think she's just the little life lessons that I learned from her during my time in Florida. We had some funny moments too. Shelly was there. Our hotel was on fire and we had to buy some PJs from Old Navy.
Oh my gosh, literally it was like my first year. So both of our first years, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, oh yeah, it's spring season and there's literally a hotel and it's like a nice hotel this time. And they're like, fire everyone out, and the girls are coming off like white uniforms in like a raining game too. It wasn't even like everyone was like, cool, we'll just chill in our uniforms. It was disgusting. And so we're running into Old Navy and getting in line with our 50 sets of PJs and credit card machines down at Old Navy.
Oh gosh.
Becky, speaking of Becky, but she was fun and funny to watch too. Both Sarah and I were like, all right, we just got to pick out something. She was going for shorts. We're like, no, we got to get pants. Like it was a bonding experience. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think you remember like the funny moments, but yeah, I just say like the impact that she's had on my career just from like not just as a coach, but like as a human. And then I think the other two, like Randy Waldrum, obviously worked with Houston. Like he gave me my first start, sort of. And at the time, the Dash had, the US players that play for the Dash were like Carly Lloyd, Megan Klingenberg, who's on a roster right now at Portland, and Morgan Bryan, and those players won the World Cup. And so like just being able to be around that at that time was something that was like really impactful. And then Erica Dambeck at Penn State, like different experience completely from Florida and Houston, but needed it. It was, Erica worked with the full national team at the time. And so just being able to get some insights from that side. So just completely different experiences, Florida, Penn State, Houston. And I think those experiences are kind of the building blocks for what was to come and hopefully what is to come for many years, hopefully.
Love that. And with those experiences, and I love that you've had such varied experiences, how have you seen the industry grow or change in the past few years? And then kind of where do you see it going?
That's a great question. I think in our field, there's more opportunities now than there ever has been. So we have a league called the USL that's competing against our league. And so I think, and they're trying to really gear that towards giving females opportunities, which is amazing. And so I think now more than ever, there's more resources being pumped into women's sports. And not just, obviously I don't have the full knowledge of like what's happening in women's basketball or what's happening in track and field, but I do know in our sport, like we're expanding, there's more opportunities now than there ever has been. So I think that is also awesome for players that are leaving the college realm, because there's also an opportunity for more players to actually have professional opportunities. So perhaps they don't get drafted by an NWSL team, but then they can go play in their own country. Like they don't have to go to Europe. They don't have to play for very minimal wages. They get actually go make a living wage as a professional athlete. So I think we're seeing that more and more. And I think that's providing more opportunities for coaches, operations, management positions, coaching positions, playing positions. So yeah, I think that's the way it's going. It's just being more money pumped in, and we're seeing that there's going to be more opportunities.
That's great, especially for our students, because that's the goal. I mean, that's why we're on this podcast. We want people to take on these opportunities. So for our students who maybe want to go into coaching, what can they do to prepare themselves to be in a position like what you're in?
I would say the networking piece is really important. So I would say reaching out to, maybe coaches that align with kind of the path that they want to go on, or whatever that looks like. Like, for example, with Becky, like I used to watch all her press conferences, and I used to like just try and find any article that I could. And I didn't obviously know like fully values aligned, but I did know that was somebody I wanted to work for. And I think that's the first thing is like, sometimes you learn from people that don't align with your values either and how you would coach. And so I think that's important. But yeah, I would say networking, big piece. I would say if there is a license process, like soccer might be the only one that does, but I would say definitely do that, because I think it expands your knowledge, but it also expands the people that you get to meet. And then I would say for coaching, like it's a lot of long hours and it's not glamorous at times. And even in our realm, it's the same. We take 6-hour flights every other week across the country to play in New York, to play in DC, to play in Orlando. So yeah, you definitely have to love it. So
that's helpful and a good reminder. I mean, I think everyone thinks like it's so pretty on TV and glamorous on Instagram and TikTok, like all the things that like you're like, yeah, everyone wants to do it, but to go like at every level, there are things that are difficult. It might get easier in some ways, but there's still like it's a lifestyle. I'm like, this is a lifestyle. This isn't a career. Like this isn't just a job, because it's distinctively different to me.
There's no work-life balance. Honestly, that's what I've come to realize, and that's like my number one probably thing that I had never sorted out. It's more work-life integration, and you have to really be mindful. And it's something I'm still working on for sure. It's like my downfall, because I just think you can. With coaching, there's like it's the rub of coaching. There's always something to do. So there's always something to strive for. There's always something to learn. And so you have to really be intentional about like closing the laptop and actually taking time out. Otherwise, if you don't, like you just do a disservice to the people that you work with, because you're going to end up burning out. But yeah, it's definitely, you definitely have to love it, and it's not glamorous at all. But I think the rewards are far greater when you are impacting people for years to come.
Yeah, and speaking of that, what are things, because the whole work-life balance, we had asked that for a couple seasons, and it was like you definitely saw the awkwardness of people in the industry like, and they kind of like come up with something because they're not going to say like, no, I don't have it really. But so we changed the question to what are things you do to stay healthy in a high-paced, high-demand, high-pressure environment?
I work out. I have a Peloton that I have a love-hate relationship with. But I honestly, like, that's my number one thing is like trying to find a hobby. And living in the Pacific Northwest, like, it's probably my favorite place that I've ever lived because it's gorgeous. Like the mountains, you've got all the hiking like areas to go do lots of outdoor things. So yeah, that's something that I'm working on, the hobby part. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, to be totally transparent. But yeah, working out in work is like, again, like going back to your point about lifestyle, like Becky was very good at like being able to switch off, like leaving work, not texting anybody after 7 o'clock, falling asleep on her couch at 8 o'clock. Like, like she just like did the same thing every day. But yeah, I haven't found that yet. I don't watch TV. I don't do anything. So, but yeah, we're working on it. I think it's really hard when you're in like such a high pressure, high performing environment. Like, again, like trying to chase your career. But yeah, it's just something that I think I've always struggled with for sure.
Yeah, well, to be determined. It can always evolve and change too, though. And for going back to students a little bit, what are important things they should consider when pursuing coaching jobs or pursuing careers in sports? Any suggestions on, you've kind of named like, hey, like, do you want this lifestyle? But is there anything else that comes to mind when, maybe even something that you didn't know would be the case that you kind of learned along the way that would have been helpful?
I would say to create kind of a like coaching portfolio. And like, because I think like when you apply for jobs, like everyone sends a resume and a cover letter, and it's like, how can you make yourself stand out? And so whether that's like creating a portfolio with your recruiting philosophy or your coaching philosophy or testimonials from people that you've worked with, like just something that like makes you stand out from everybody else. And honestly, like the great part about it is it actually gets your thoughts on paper to what you actually do believe. And the reality is like, I created one like a year ago and it's changed. Like it's so different now than it was a year ago. And so it's something that constantly evolves. And that honestly, that's coaching. Like you're always kind of like, growth is like the infinite game. Like you're always kind of chasing like you never really land in coaching because there's always something else, like modern trend that's changing that you're trying to like chase or learn. And so like, it's just, you never stand still as a coach. Like you always have to keep moving. So I think that's what I would say is like, to create that and then understand that like it's never finished, it's always going to evolve and grow. And then in terms of anything else that I didn't know in terms of getting into coaching, I would say learn from other sports, especially in this country. Like at the University of Florida, like you have so many resources. Like you have all the collegiate sports, you have your department, which is amazing, you have other departments, and you can learn. Like I feel like you don't always fully utilize the resources that you have access to. Like we don't have the facilities that the University of Florida has. Like we just don't. And so I think being able to utilize the resources that are offered to you, whether that's going and having a coffee with a graduate assistant of men's basketball or having a coffee with like an analyst from women's basketball or men's soccer, whatever, or women's soccer. I think that's like what I would say is just like learning from people in the industry that in different sports is also something I would say. And like you can learn from like basketball is very similar to soccer, but I also think you can learn from other sports too, like how football does it. I remember Shelley, like we used to go watch Dan Mullen's practices, and I remember they had players like basically doing one-on-one tackles, and it's not something that we would do. But like the fact that they were able to like have sportsmanship after that, like you can always learn from like everything and everyone. So that's what I would say.
I think that's great, and I love the common theme of you never arrive. You can always learn more. There's always more to do. I love that. Okay, so for our students, a lot of our students who kind of tune into this podcast or reach out to Shelley and I, they're trying to prepare themselves for that next step as much as possible. And so if you're looking to hire an assistant coach or just somebody to work on your team as a GA or anything, what type of qualifications do you look for? What advice could you give those people who are kind of entering the work world kind of for the first time?
Honestly, like I probably wouldn't look at qualifications. I would probably more look at the person. I think when you're in a leadership position, like the people that you work with are your success. And so the qualities that I would try and find people where qualities align with my own core values. And I think that's a good filter. So like courage, what else we got? Integrity, accountability. Like, for example, accountability, like we're going to make mistakes. So if I have an interview with somebody and I say, like, have you ever made a mistake? And they say no. So I think like just being okay with making mistakes. And like the reality is like we all do. And I think courage, like just being able to like dare greatly. I know that's as corny as it sounds, but like dare greatly with like the risk of falling short, because that's sports. We're always going to at some point fall short and have to get back up again. So I think I would use my core values as kind of a filter for recruitment. And I think qualifications, yeah, you have to have, you know, kind of maybe the basics, but I think it all comes down to like, does that person fit? And I would also say like my job as a leader is to also develop that person. So yeah, and I think just in this generation, honestly, it sounds very simple. I actually don't think I'm very talented. I think I just work really hard. And I'm just obsessed with what I do. And I think, and I'm not saying that's like for everybody, but I think finding people that like are willing to go above and beyond the job description is something that is a separator for sure. And I'm not saying you have to work 23 hours like the old days, but like you just have to be able to fill in the gaps when you need to, because that's the reality when you run an organization. Like there's going to be gaps and you have to try and fill. So yeah, I would say using my core values as a filter. And again, just good people, just finding good people.
That's really great. And I've been thinking a lot about kind of this concept of, because I know in athletics, it's like in sports, there's this kind of overarching theme of you work really, 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 really hard and you need balance and integration and all those things. But I remember before I ever was burned out working in athletics, I would travel all the time. I was working late nights and I loved it. And so I wonder sometimes if, and I guess this is a question for you, like maybe you have that integration because your needs are being met at this stage. Maybe 5 years from now, you're going to want more balance or whatever, but like, is it working right now? And is it, because I just, at least that was the case with me. When I first got started, I didn't mind working extra hours. I had the energy and I loved it. So if you want to speak to that at all.
It's actually a great point, because a lot of the assistant coaches that are in our league are like around my age, like 30s. And it's really interesting because like the lifespan of a head coach in our league is really short, like 14 months. But last year when I was on the pro course, we interviewed different people from different sports, and we interviewed Joe Mazzulla from the Boston Celtics. And like that guy's like 35 years old, like, and they play, I don't know much about the NBA, but I know they play every few days. And so I was asking somebody, I was like, why, like, how do you think like these NBA head coaches, like they're so young, but you need the energy, like to be able to do that nonstop. So I actually agree with you. Like there is some sort of, like my job is very unstable. Like, yes, I have a contract, but the reality is if a new head coach comes in, like I could be gone. And so I think to your point, like in 5 years time, maybe I don't want that anymore. Maybe I do want to actually buy a house and not actually have an Airbnb. Right. And so like that comes like part of the glamorous part. Like I don't live in a, you know, I don't have a pool and live in a 4-bedroom house in Florida. Like I live in somebody's Airbnb in Poland. And so, you know, like it just is what it is. At some point, I do think like your priorities change, and that could be from having kids. It could be from just not wanting to continuously move and be settled. So I think that's actually a great point that you make. And I think there is some sort of value in what your priorities are at that time, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm hearing from you, I can tell you have a lot of self-awareness, which I do think is important for everybody to kind of continue to develop because of that exact I didn't really know in my career when I was burned out that I was there because I enjoyed it for so long. And so I think that's really great. Okay, so if our listeners want to reach out and maybe get more of this wisdom from you, what is the best way that they can kind of connect?
So I'm happy to connect email, social media. So I'm on X. Sounds weird to call it X now. And it's just, my username is just at Sarah Lowdon. I'm on Instagram. Sometimes I post there, sometimes I don't. I think that's just Sarah N. Lowdon. And then I'm happy to share my email address too, if anyone wants to connect through email, and then LinkedIn as well. It's just my name.
Perfect. And that makes it easy when it's just your name. That's perfect. Okay, so before we wrap, we like to have fun on our podcast. And so Shelly is going to walk you through an activity.
Yeah. Okay. So these are the fire away questions. We're going to do this for 1 minute. We'll keep a timer for 1 minute. And I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions about yourself. Pretty easy questions. So whatever comes to mind first, throw that out there. You can also pass if you want to pass. Totally up to you. And we'll see how many you get through. And we'll learn a little bit about you. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Here we go. When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Pop star.
Favorite sport to play?
Soccer.
What's the worst haircut you've ever had?
A bowl cut.
Name 2 daily habits.
Oh, geez. 2 daily habits. Drink coffee, work out.
Favorite zoo animal?
Orangutan.
What was the last book you read?
What drives winning?
First job?
First job was a paper round.
Mountains or beaches?
I have to say mountains right now.
Favorite type of food?
Indian food.
Favorite holiday?
Hawaii. Just got back.
What phone app do you waste the most time on?
Oh, great question. Spotify, actually.
Oh.
And time. Yes.
Nice.
Great job. Good job.
Sorry.
How are the questions?
They were good. I was just like, the zoo one, like there's so many. I didn't know what to say. I was like, I should have said penguins because that's what I saw at the Tampa Zoo.
Oh, yeah. Penguins. No one said penguins yet, actually.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's so funny because I could never do that because after the first answer, I want to ask follow-up questions. And it's like, that's not the game. It's not the game. But awesome learning more about you, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today. We know that our University of Florida community, our sport management department, our students, alumni really appreciate all of your wisdom and insight that you shared today. And we always plug our department. So for our followers, our viewers, to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X. We're at UFSPM, and we are your hosts, Jessica Francis
and Shelly Lyle.
And go Gators. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.